We are going to talk about trees and watering and making sure your trees are healthy. My name is Allison. I'm with CSU Extension in Larimer County. I'm a extension field specialist specializing in horticulture, and I've been in my position, this is year 21. So I will say that in my 21 years here in Colorado, this is a strange season. So don't feel like you are alone or that you are thinking that it's a really odd way to start things. So we are going to have a lot of conversation tonight. And like Ali said, you will get all of my slides. So don't feel that you have to write down everything. Also, you'll get the presentation recording. And so you can pause things and look at slides or analyze as you need to. I am with CSU, and I want to let you know that CSU is an equal opportunity access and non-discrimination university. If there's anything we can do to accommodate your needs, please let me know, and also visit our website for more information. So launching right into things, Colorado as a state is considered to be semi-arid, and we are located in the western part of the United States. We have anywhere from maybe 8 to 15 inches of precipitation a year, and that includes snow and rain and anything that's wet that falls from the sky. What's also a factor is that people are moving to Colorado. We have a lot of people that are moving into the state, which is increasing the pressure on our already limited water that we have here. And so word is out. It's a great place to live. I have been proud to live here for over 2 decades, but I'm a transplant. I grew up in Minnesota where we have lakes and we have snow and we have rain and all of the things. So moving to a semi-arid climate was quite a change. What's also interesting though is that when we plan accordingly and have our landscapes really be water efficient, we can save on our water bills. So I live in Windsor. I received the notice from our town municipality saying that the water prices are going to go up. And of course, the more you use, you're going to go into a different tier. And so we can do a lot to actually save water in our landscapes if we're smart about it and strategic. And going into this season where we might be watering a couple months longer than typical, it's going to be even more important. So you probably heard the statistic that of our household water budget during the summer, about 50% goes to outdoor water use. And that is true. It's not our total budget. It's not that 50% of the water in Colorado goes to watering our outdoor landscapes. It's these individual water budgets that you have during the summer. And that makes sense because during the winter months, you're still using your water with laundry and toilets and showering and things like that. But when you fire up your irrigation system, whenever that may be, in April, May, June, you are then going to start increasing water to your landscape. So water can be a significant part of our budgets, and I think we're all very water conscious, and we're also very budget conscious. So we want to make sure that we are using and allocating our resources appropriately. And that's what really the focus is. So this water-wise landscaping, this making sure that you're selecting plants like those from Garden in a Box, those are all appropriate plants that can do better or thrive on very limited water inputs. And you can still have it all. I like to say you can have your cake and eat it too, and you can still have a lawn. You can still have trees and shrubs and beautiful flowers. But selecting plant material is really a key part of the water-wise landscape. And in extension, if you've heard any of our presentations ever, we really promote 2 things. One is mulch. We love mulch. The second is that this idea of right plant, right place, making sure that you are selecting the right plant material to put into your landscape. So coming from a very different climate in Minnesota, there are certain plants that I know I just cannot grow here in Colorado because they like higher humidity. They like more moisture. So those are plants that I have to long for, but not necessarily have in the landscape, and select others that are maybe similar. So this idea of Colorado scaping or the Colorado scape is using plants that are appropriate for our climate, that have adapted to or are using lower water needs. And it doesn't mean that we're just focusing on natives. I love native plants. They absolutely have a place in the landscape. There's also a lot of introduced ornamentals that can do really well that have been selected with a lower water use in mind. And doing this and having the right plant materials and planting them appropriately really then does decrease the inputs that you have to put into the landscape. It doesn't mean that you don't have to deadhead or weed. You'll still have to do that. But it does mean that you might have lower pesticide inputs, or using mulch will help with better water moisture retention and things like that. So that's the whole idea of water-wise landscaping and making sure that we're using plant materials appropriately. Now tonight what I'll talk about is this mixed use landscape, and that might be a new term for you, and it's one that I kind of have made up over the years, just because I'm trying to figure out how to define where we have trees and turf in a landscape. Because if you think about it, trees and turf don't naturally get along. They don't necessarily always grow together. If you think of the Pawnee grasslands, the Pawnee Butte grassland areas, you don't see a lot of trees there. And just like a forest, you're not going to see a lot of grass underneath our forested areas. And so what we do is we take these two very different ecosystems, trees and turf, and plop them together in a landscape, and then we expect everything to get along, and it's sometimes really difficult. So these landscapes are part of the built environment. So these are landscapes that are manufactured and not naturally growing. In those landscapes we have trees and turf and shrubs and perennials and annuals. Sometimes we add vegetables to the mix, and so you have all of these different species that have different water use requirements that we're trying to get to grow and be as healthy as possible. So then when we change things or maybe modify irrigation or maintenance practices, we can affect things perhaps without even realizing that we're doing it. So this season, if you're planning to go into this season that's been dry, and maybe you're thinking of, oh, I'll reduce the water use on my entire landscape by dropping an irrigation runtime, or maybe turning it off during certain times of the year, it can affect some of those other plants that you may not think of. So that's kind of what the idea of this mixed use landscape is. And I'm a tree nerd. I love trees. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm also a turf nerd. I love the turf. But trees in the landscape, if you think about what the stalwart beings are, these are the trees. These are the things that have been in our landscapes for decades, or we hope that will be there for decades. And investing in our trees is always a good idea. So estimates vary depending on the species of tree and depending on how big it is, but generally trees are worth about $50 per square inch. That's really good. So if you have mature trees on your landscape value is going to be more than if you have a brand new landscape with a couple of small trees. And when we're looking at prioritizing where to water, tree survival really should be at the very top of our list, because trees, as you know, do so much for our ecosystem. They do so much for wildlife. They're beautiful. They help shade our houses. And so they're doing a lot and providing a lot of those ecosystem benefits. So we want to make sure that when we're making these modifications or changes to our landscape, that we are making sure that we water the trees and care for the trees in a way that helps them keep healthy and survive and reduce some of those stressors that they might get. So it's fair to say, you know this, it's tough to be a tree in Colorado. Actually, it's tough to be a person in Colorado. So we are in the time of year where you might drive to work with the heat on in the morning, and then in the afternoon you have the air conditioning on and the windows down, right? It's these wild temperatures that we're getting where it's going to be, in the 20s on Sunday night, but then next week, in the middle of the week, we might hit 80. And so it's a crazy thing where we're having these temperature swings. So it's tough to be a tree and survive. So we have, of course, weather. We have wind. If you're in certain areas of the state, you can't just say, I'm in Colorado, it's windy. There are certain areas of the state that's more windy than others. Our soils, they're not that bad. I know we like to complain about them, but they're not that bad. So they tend to be higher in pH. They're not as weathered as some of our more acidic soils. We get these crazy temperature roller coaster swings, and then we do have a short-ish growing season. In the Front Range, we might have about 100 days of growing season, but if you go higher up in elevation, you might only have 20 or 30 days. So it's tough to face all of these conditions. So again, going back to this idea of these native ecosystems where trees and grasses rarely grow happily together, but again, we are putting them into this built environment in these mixed-use landscapes and expecting everything to work out well, and those plants to get along. So one thing to keep in mind is, depending on the age of your landscape, whatever was established first or is the most mature, whether that be the trees or whether that be the turf, that plant often has the advantage over the one that's introduced later or newly introduced into the landscape. Okay, so if you have an established lawn and your house is 30 years old, your lawn is 30 years old, and you replace a tree and you plant it with something new and small, know that that tree is going to be at a disadvantage of a very established, mature turf system. Conversely, if you have a really big, mature oak tree in your landscape and you're trying to maintain the turf underneath it, the turf is going to struggle because the tree has the advantage and is going to cast more shade that will then outcompete the turf system. So just know that depending on how your landscape is and as they age, you're going to have to make adjustments to the management of the plants in your landscape. So if you have a more mature landscape, you might have to start taking areas out of turf because it's just too hard to grow turf successfully. Okay, so think about that. And before you do any conversions, so if you are planning to do conversions, whether it's replacing part of your lawn or maybe swapping out your grass to something else, or maybe doing a complete xeric renovation with no grass, always stop and think about the steps that you need to take in order to do it successfully. So don't just jump the gun and start doing things. Make sure that you're really thoughtful and planning how you're going to do this in order to make it successful, not only for your existing plants, but for those that you're going to be putting into your landscape as well. And also think about the problems that turf can cause for trees. Like, turf is going to compete with water for water and nutrients and oxygen. If you are spraying any herbicides on your turf, sometimes those can affect trees, maybe not intentionally, but sometimes some of those soil residual herbicides can be a problem for trees. And then you can do lots of damage to the base of trees with equipment. So we've all seen trees that have been damaged at the base from lawnmowers or string trimmers where they've been continually whacked or bumped from equipment, and then you have bark missing. So those can be issues. But then trees can be problematic for turf too. So they are doing the same things. They are competing with the turf for water and oxygen and nutrients. They may cast too much shade, and then you have sometimes these issues with surface roots, and that's just a natural thing that trees do. It doesn't mean that the tree is bad. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your landscape. There are just certain species of trees that tend to have more shallow root systems, but then doing maintenance around those roots can be problematic as well. So just to extrapolate this a little bit more, so the first thing is that trees can outcompete turf for light. And so again, thinking of those older mature landscapes, your tree is big. It's casting a ton of shade. So trees can reduce the amount of light available for turf growth, and it can also reduce the duration of light. How much light is actually getting to the turf surface? How many hours of light? So when I'm talking to people about, doing renovations or swapping out their bluegrass to some other species, one of the first questions I ask is, how much sun does your lawn get? Because if it's only getting a couple hours in the afternoon, grass probably isn't a feasible option. Trees can also reduce the quality of light. So the tree is big and it's intercepting all of the good light. So not to take you back to like a plant physiology class, but if you've ever seen the spectrum of light, the rainbow spectrum, there are certain wavelengths that plants need in order to grow and to do well. So green light, which is what's reflected, and then the far red light it's okay light, but it's not great for plant health. And that is what the turf is trying to grow on, and that's why you get spindly growth or kind of leggy growth and things like that. So it's not only the amount of light, but it's the duration and the quality as well. So I have a graphic of what that looks like. So again, that green light is reflected, which is why plants look green to us, but the the tree itself is going to intercept all of the good light. So the red and blue wavelengths is what the tree is taking in to do photosynthesis and produce carbohydrates and food for itself and all of those great things. And then some light is filtered down and intercepted and finally hits the turf surface, but generally it's the leftover light, or it's not really great light, and it's referred to as the far red light. So it's okay-ish for plant growth, but it's not great. It's not as good as the red and blue light. So when you have thinning spaces below a canopy of the tree, you might not have great growth, but also keep in mind that it's going to depend on the type of tree you have. So here are two different tree species. We have a blue spruce on the left and then a honey locust in the middle. And the honey locust has thinner, smaller leaves, and so we like to say that it provides dappled shade. So there's pockets of sunlight that can get through that tree canopy. So growing grass underneath a honey locust isn't as difficult as growing grass underneath a spruce, which is dense and casts a lot of shade. And the other thing is that spruce doesn't lose its needles like the honey locust loses its leaves in the fall, right? Those needles are always on the tree. So the perpetual casting of the shade is always happening with the spruce. The other thing is that trees are big. So those roots of those trees are taking up all of the available water that is provided and also getting some of the best oxygen, because that's where a lot of the roots are located. So it's a confusing, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. So I've been asked this question, and you might have heard this myth out in the world that, grass doesn't grow underneath spruce or pine trees or evergreens because it's just too acidic from the needles. And that's not true. It is true that the needles are acidic, but in our soils are what we call really highly buffered. And so buffered soils tend to have free lime, and they neutralize any acid that's added to it. So even though that the needles are acidic, we have free lime in our soils, and then when you add an acid to a base, you get a neutral pH. So that's not the issue. It's more of the shade issue plus the competition of the tree itself. So the tree has a lot of roots. It has a lot of fine fibrous roots that are taking up the water and nutrients, and it's just too shady and too dry to grow any grass. So the recommendation I have is, if you have a lot of mature trees, especially evergreens in the landscape, just let the needles drop. Leave them in place. Unless you're in a fire-prone area, then that's not a good idea. But if you can, leave the needles in place. It's a natural mulch. That's what happens up in the mountains with our native forests. And it's better for the tree. Plus, it reduces the ability for you to do any damage to the base of the tree with your lawn mowing equipment. You can still do weed control if needed, even with the mulch in place. That's totally fine. You just need to use the right products and do it safely. So this idea of mulch, I told you that Extension loves two things. We love to promote mulch, and that this is why. Mulching trees, and this has been studied extensively by numerous universities going back decades. So this was a study done by the Morton Arboretum back in the late 1970s. And they did a study of having newly planted trees with grass underneath them and then newly planted trees with mulch underneath them. They did several measurements over the course of multiple years, and at the end of the study, they concluded that having mulch underneath trees not only promotes healthier trees because you get a more increase in fine root development, and the fine roots are those fibrous ones. You can actually see them depicted in the photo there. The fine roots are the ones that are absorbing water and nutrients, and so those are the roots that we really want to encourage. The big structural roots that you see are more storage roots, and they also help keep the tree in place. So the way the tree is able to absorb water is through these fine root development. So a 400% increase in fine roots versus the roots that were under grass And they also had better top growth, and then again eliminated that lawnmower injury. So grass is a plant that is competing. It is competing for water, it's competing for nutrients, and grass is pretty dense and it has a pretty fibrous root system itself. Plus, where the grass roots are located and where the tree roots are located are essentially in the same zone of the soil. I mean, we're talking maybe in the top 6 inches. Most of our tree roots are in the top 6 inches. And we have some that go a little bit deeper, but this idea that tree roots go, feet into the ground is really a myth. So a lot of tree roots are going to be more shallow and they're going to spread out from the canopy of the tree. So if you can find a mulch, preferably an organic based mulch that works for you in your situation, that is going to be better and promote better tree health. The other thing is that long term, even your oldest trees in the landscape are going to benefit from mulch. Another study that was done at the Morton Arboretum in Illinois. So they looked at these old mature trees. They looked to see if mulch after 20 or 30 years actually had a benefit, and it does. It does still benefit your trees long term, from the time you plant all the way until the tree is fully mature. So briefly talking about the shade tolerance of grasses, and this is really important if you are considering converting your lawn to another grass species, not just taking out your lawn, but if you're actually thinking of going to a native lawn or one of the warm season grasses. So going back to the tolerance of grasses, the most shade tolerant grasses we have are the fine fescues. So those are, if you envision like the sweeping dunes of St. Andrews in Scotland, the moors of the ocean, that's what those fine fescues are. So they're very wiry. They kind of tend to lodge and they move. They kind of have this wave pattern. If you don't mow them, they can be absolutely beautiful. They're also a very nice lawn grass. But if you're looking at some of the warm season species that use less water, much less water in a lot of cases, let's say you're considering doing buffalo grass, which is a Colorado native, or blue grama, that would probably be about the same. You'll notice that the shade tolerance is not that great. So the cool season grasses have much better shade tolerance than the warm season grasses do. Bermuda grass, which is not a native, but is one of the grasses that you could consider converting to, we're thinking about half the water use of bluegrass. Cannot tolerate shade. It will do very poorly and it will start to die out, and then you're going to have some really challenges of how to either keep that grass growing. So this is one of the considerations to take into account when you're looking at doing these turf conversions or renovating the landscape in any way. So that's just a point to make, that all grasses are not the same. They don't all have the same shade tolerance, and it's an important point to make. So if you are working with an older landscape and you have a lot of shade, there's a few things that you can do, especially if you're looking to save water, if that's your primary goal. So the first question to ask is turf really necessary? Do I have to have turf in this area? Maybe your household has changed and maybe you went from having 2 large black labs to 1 small poodle. So if you went from having a lot of traffic to maybe limited traffic, or maybe you have kids that have grown up and they're not using the backyard as much as you did and you're getting more shade, there are ways then that you can start to eliminate the turf and replace it with more shade tolerant perennials or shrubs, or using mulch in a more effective way than trying to struggle growing grass. You could convert to a different species, so maybe the fine fescues are what's for you and you don't have to mow them and you love how they look. Shaded areas of the landscape will also use less water. And so if these are areas that you keep on watering as you would the front yard, which is getting full sun, you do need to make some adjustments. So they're not growing as quickly, they're not using as much water, so definitely dial back how many times a week you are watering those areas, and they also don't need as much fertility. So that is a benefit, right? You're going to save water on both, or you save money on both water and fertilizer. You could mow your grass a little bit taller, try to increase air circulation. So maybe you start pruning your trees or having an arborist come in and try to open up the canopy to some degree. Or you move on from turf and look at some other plant materials, which is very much a possibility. And there are shade tolerant, water-wise perennials that you can consider. So a lot of what we tend to focus on are perennials for sunny landscapes, but there's a lot of shade tolerant perennials that can do very well in these spaces. Okay, around our trees, we want to make sure that we're using wood mulch correctly. So it is one thing to just throw mulch out and, think that it's working. It's another thing to do it correctly. And the one thing I want to emphasize to you is where we see mulch fail, or maybe you've not had the greatest success because it tends to move, or maybe it blows with wind, is it's just not a thick enough depth. Okay, so when I'm recommending 4 to 5 inches thick, you're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot of mulch. But as the mulch settles, so mulch, it's pretty airy when you put it down in the landscape and you put it down to a depth of 5 inches. As it starts to settle, or maybe you have dogs or someone using the landscape and kind of pushing down on the mulch, it's going to compact down to a depth of about 3 inches. And that's fine. But if you start with 3 inches, then it settles, you might then start to get some of those gaps that you'll see. So the bare soil, maybe some more weed pressure is probably not doing as much benefit if it was a thicker layer. So that's one thing. So go a little bit thicker on your layer of mulch. The other thing is on newly planted trees, make sure that you don't have any mulch over the top of the root ball. So in April, if you're going to be celebrating Arbor Day by planting some new trees in your landscape, plant them properly, and then also make sure that you're keeping any mulch off the top of the root ball. The reason for that is that when you water, you want to make sure that you're watering the root ball and not just watering the mulch area. So you want to make sure that you're keeping those roots of your newly planted tree nice and hydrated. On our mature trees, keep the mulch at least 6 to 8 inches away from the base of trees. That is going to be a good thing. We don't want volcano mulches. We don't want to pile mulch at the base of trees. And then mulch to a diameter of at least 2 to 4 feet out in all directions. Now, in this case, this is a park. They obviously have a lot more space than you might have in your front yard, but they went out to the drip line. And in a perfect world, I would recommend that everybody mulch to the drip line. So that's where the canopy extends. But you can't do that. So any mulch that you can provide, as long as it's away from the base of the tree, is going to be beneficial because it's going to eliminate the possibility for lawnmower and string trimmer damage. And again, I recommend, if you can, use an organic mulch. It's going to benefit your soils. It can be replenished and replaced. Organic mulch may not work in every situation. So again, it needs to be really sited appropriately for your own landscape. And then do not use landscape fabric under mulch. Landscape fabric has many problems, one of which is that the pores in the landscape fabric clog over time. So small dirt particles can sift into those pore spaces. So water may end up sheeting away and not actually being absorbed. Weeds still grow, so you're going to get weeds on top of the mulch, but not necessarily coming up underneath. But in order to promote best plant health, which is, I hope, what we're focused on, using landscape fabric is not a good recommendation. So maybe the question has come to your mind of how much water should I apply to the landscape? And I will go into water with a little bit more detail later if we don't have a good answer for you. So if you are a person who's like, just tell me exactly how much water to put down, I can't give you that answer. And it's a really hard thing because it depends. It depends on so many factors. It depends on the age of your landscape and what the temperature is and what your soil is like and what kind of plant material you have. The best resource we have was a PhD that was done by Dr. Peters at the University of Minnesota. And her research looked at the water use of different trees and turf in landscapes. So she was looking at trees in a park situation. She looked at trees in a residential landscape, and then also looked at athletic fields. The best that she came up with, and it's not a bad number, to be honest, it makes a lot of sense, is that the trees are using about 50% of the water, and then your turf area is using about 50% of the water. And this is typically during the growing season. Now, if you have a lot of evergreens, that number may fluctuate a little bit. You might have a little bit more water use from the trees than from the turf, but I think 50-50 split is fair. So what this means for you is that every time you irrigate the landscape, especially if you're putting water on your lawn area, you're giving about 50% of the water to the lawn and 50% to your trees. And that's fine. You just need to remember that they're sharing the water that you're providing. That's the biggest thing. So the important thing is when you irrigate a landscape, you're not just watering the turf, but you are watering and benefiting the other plants surrounding it. So there might be shrubs that are located close to the turf. You're benefiting those. There are going to be trees in those landscapes, and you're going to benefit those from your lawn irrigation. So as we go into this season and we're not sure what it's going to look like with water restrictions or, what we need to do in order to make sure that we're meeting our water budgets, but just know that sometimes watering the lawn is maybe the easiest way to also water your mature trees. And we will get into more specifics about water. But I see that there's plenty of questions in the chat. And so you can look at Maple the Beagle, and I will look at a couple of things. So the first question is going back to the $50 per square inch. That is based on diameter. So that reference of how much trees are of value to the landscape. So that is based on the diameter of the tree. So the bigger the tree, the more value the tree is for your landscape as a whole. The next question is compost good for mature trees? Compost, and I don't know which context you're asking. Is compost good as a mulch, or is compost good as like an amendment? Compost isn't bad. It's not the best mulch. And so I would say that instead of focusing on compost can benefit the soil and provide good organic matter to the soil, but it doesn't do the same things that mulch does long term. So I would maybe change your practices. But again, I don't know in what context you're using mulch. So is the 4-foot ring of mulch around the trees the diameter? It's as far out as you want. So 4 feet out from, it could be the diameter, it could be the radius, so just going out from one side of the tree. It depends on the space of your landscape, but do the best you can. Some mulch is better than no mulch. But again, at least keep it enough of a mulch ring so that it keeps equipment away. That would be the bare minimum. The question is, do you need to remove grass under the tree for mulching? You can do a couple things. So one is that you can remove the grass and then add your mulch ring. That's fine. You could also put the mulch down and then smother the grass that is around there. That's what I did in this case. So with Maple the Beagle, I just put down mulch, and then as the turf started to grow through, I chose to use a non-selective herbicide to spray out that, but you could also dig out any grass that starts to peek through the mulch areas. So you could do it a couple of different ways. Specific question on dogs and gorilla hair mulch. The gorilla hair mulch, so that's the shredded cedar or redwood that you might get. It's kind of fine and it's very porous. The gorilla hair, so first of all, it's not a renewable mulch product, which is why the chipped mulch, whether it's from your Christmas trees in your municipality or the bag stuff that you get, the actual chips, the shredded hair, I think we're using more of it than the trees that we can grow. So we're using it more quickly than we're able to grow the trees. It also tends to compact down and mat, and it can become hydrophobic. So just be aware of those things. I think you could use it as maybe a top layer. But if you do a thick layer of the gorilla hair, it might be very dry underneath it because water can't penetrate through. So just keep that in mind. A couple other questions that we'll answer. Let's see. A lot of questions here. I'll just pick one. Okay. So another question regarding not mulching over the top of the root ball of a tree. What about soil temperature management and moisture retention? So it's okay when I recommend not putting mulch over the top of the root ball. This was actually extensively studied at the University of Florida. And what they found is that the moisture lost from the top of the root ball was minimal. And that's in a more humid climate. I understand that. So, but even here in Colorado, even if that first, half inch of water or half inch of soil at the top of the root ball dries out, it's okay because the majority of the roots are further down. It's more cumbersome and worse for the newly planted tree to have mulch on top. And temperature isn't such a big thing, especially when it comes to those roots. So that's not a problem, but I would really refrain from putting any sort of mulch over the top of a newly planted tree. Joyce, I will answer your question about watering trees in the winter in the next section, so you can wait for that. Okay, I'm going to move on. Unless Allie, is there any question that I definitely should answer right now?
No, I think going ahead and moving on for now is a great plan. Yeah, take your water break, but I think we got the bulk of them.
Okay, sounds good. I will talk about winter watering. And the answer is yes. If you have to leave right now, the answer is yes, you should water. Okay, so let's talk about eliminating turf from the landscape and what this could mean for the trees that remain. So the Cash for Grass programs are in full swing, and there's many ways that you can reduce turf areas and not only maybe get a little bit of money back in your pocket, but also it's a way that we can start being a little more sustainable, potentially with some of the water that we're applying to our landscapes. And I will say, working in the horticulture industry, in the green industry, we are an easy industry to target. When water becomes scarce or we're looking at water restrictions, it's very easy for people who don't maybe understand all of the benefits of our landscapes, for them just to say, oh, just turn off the water. Oh, just stop watering. Because we know you're in this class because you obviously have a love of plants and you have a real appreciation of our landscapes, and you know all of the things that they can do for us, both economically, environmentally, socially. Landscapes are a place where people come together. And just think, if we encouraged our kids to go play soccer on the pile of rocks, that's not the best thing. We want to make sure that we have green spaces for our kids and our pets to play and enjoy. So landscape conversions can save money, but again, it needs to be very deliberative and it needs to be very thoughtful. So it's not something that you can just jump into feet first without any thought behind it. So I know that it's incentivizing to save some money or to get a payment for removing some of your grass, but you also want to maintain the integrity of your neighborhood and your landscape when you do this. So please just be thoughtful. Sometimes when we have these landscape conversions, we might see tree decline. So the best case study is actually the Phoenix area. If you've been down to Arizona and you've been down to Phoenix, we know that Phoenix is much, much hotter than it is here in Colorado, and they have had their fair share of water shortages. Plus, they don't get a lot of natural precipitation. So they had a big movement, of course, to save water, and unfortunately, during this process, there wasn't a lot of thought given to the trees in the landscape, and so those trees started to decline because those trees, which were getting regular water from our landscape irrigation that's provided, were just cut off. And so they were, getting regular water. And then when you're cut off, you grow dependent on some of that water, or you need that water based on the species that you have. So you can't go from water to no water and expect everything to be fine. So sometimes when we remove the turf, mature plants start to suffer. This is a perfect example. So we have a fairly nice landscape that was done. Maybe this was a little bit of a turf strip underneath. Maybe there was drip irrigation. But in this case, I'm guessing the irrigation was completely cut off and then this tree suffered. So whomever uses this parking lot, and if you park your car underneath that tree because you wanted shade, now we're losing shade benefits and we're losing some of those environmental benefits as a result. These are closer to home, so these are all pictures of Colorado. I affectionately call the two photos on the right hell strips. So the area between the street and the sidewalk, those are strips that are really difficult to maintain. So oftentimes they're planted with grass. They might have a few trees in there. They could be called boulevard plantings. But in this case, this was a situation where the municipality or the business owners decided not to water during the heat of summer, and both were linden. The linden suffered as a result. Same thing with the tree on the left. This was more, I believe this was on actually a golf course where they started to reduce the amount of water provided. And again, when you go from an adequate amount of water for tree health and then you cut that off, things can happen. And that's the devastating part. The other thing is we don't necessarily want to rock the block. So rock doesn't have a lot of benefits. First of all, it can get very, very hot. So if you have been to the Phoenix area where they have a lot of rockscaping, you'll notice that you have this urban heat island effect where this rock can actually transmit heat and keep things hotter. It also retains heat. So at night, those areas don't cool off because they're absorbing so much heat during the day. And so they continue to release heat even as the nighttime temperatures cool things down. Also, it's not great to play on. It doesn't benefit the soils in any way. I'm not saying that rock doesn't have a place in the landscape. It does. And we can use rock for some mulch purposes. But again, it's not something where we just want to completely rock the landscape as a result. The other thing is natural plants, trees, turf, shrubs, leaves, all of those are going to be carbon sinks. And so they actually absorb carbon and they take carbon out of the atmosphere. Trees and turf are two of the best mechanisms for removing carbon in our atmosphere. Rock doesn't have that capability. So also think of it from that standpoint. So looking at this landscape, I'm not sure where it is. It's something I stole off the internet, the photo itself. But we obviously had probably what was a traditional landscape with some lawn. And then we had a renovation come in with some interesting swales of rock and mulch and a path and things like that. But I just want you to look at that tree in the center of the lawn. So I'm guessing that that tree was planted. And then we went through this renovation. Maybe I'm guessing we adjusted the irrigation. Maybe we cut off the irrigation. We didn't provide supplemental irrigation, and we're starting to see significant dieback on that tree. And this is what we don't want to happen. So this is a young tree, but imagine if it's a 40-year-old tree in your landscape that you planted when you moved in. That's not something I'm guessing that you're willing to sacrifice. So again, be very cognizant and thoughtful about your choices with water. I mentioned the unintended consequence of ambient air temperature increasing. So again, we get these heat island effects. Downtown Denver is going to be much hotter than it is out in the suburbs where there's more trees and there's more plant material because those are naturally cooling the atmosphere. Shaded streets, it's much nicer to walk down the shaded side of the street than the sunny because it is so much cooler. And here in Colorado, because we don't have those higher levels of humidity like you faced in the Midwest, the shaded streets are actually cooler, up to 30 to 40 degrees. So that's huge on a hot summer day. When we're looking for a cool spot to rest, we often find it underneath a tree or a shaded canopy. Now, going to the artificial turf, I just have a couple slides on this, and I want you to be very, very thoughtful about using or preferably not using artificial turf. So the first thing is that artificial turf is very, very hot. So here's 4 photos of temperatures, and I realize that it's hard to see the natural grass, the temperature on there, but it says 100.6. So look at the 2 in the middle, the synthetic turf, the pavement, both about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you were to walk on that with bare feet, it would be hot. Imagine if your dog with its little paws walked on that, it would be very, very hot and very uncomfortable. Natural grass is going to be much cooler because it's photosynthesizing. It is transpiring. It is releasing water and naturally cooling itself, which is a benefit. The other thing with artificial turf is that it does get so hot that it needs irrigation. So all of your artificial turf, football fields, your soccer fields, you'll notice that there is irrigation and they will run them to cool down the surface because otherwise they're basically unplayable. You can't be there. If you have someone in your family who plays soccer or football, oftentimes you need to have special cleats because the cleats can melt on the turf, the artificial turf surface. So this is really hard. And going back to places in the South where they have recreational soccer leagues, oftentimes they play those games at 2 or 3 in the morning. Imagine playing like rec soccer at 2 in the morning because the field is too hot to play on in the, evening hours, the early evening hours. So artificial turf, if that's what you're thinking, I would discourage you. It's not only incredibly expensive to do it right. You can't just buy the carpet from the box store and roll it out on your lawn. It's very, very expensive, but also think about the heat. Think about your existing plants around that area, especially if you have trees in a spot where you're looking to put in artificial turf. And then if you do have any pets, you have to think about the waste. So there are special waste liners that you have to use, and then there's chemicals that you have to dump on in order to leach the urine and the feces from that surface, and invest in a really good leaf blower because you'll need that because little leaves and particles fall down. So artificial turf is not a solution to saving water, and it can have more detrimental environmental effects than you might think. Plus, if you don't do a good job of killing off what is there, this is Bermuda grass, this is a gross Bermuda, but it can grow right back through. So don't think that it's a weed-free situation either. So as we do conversions, as conversions are happening, we really need to think about the tree and how to support the tree during this process. So a couple of things to focus on. The first is to do an evaluation. You really need to be as subjective as possible. And this is really hard because we love trees. We don't want to remove any tree in our landscape, but sometimes the best decision you can make is to that final pruning cut, right? Final pruning cut on this tree. This is not a tree that I think anybody would invest in unless it has some sentimental value. But if you were to go in and cut out all of those dead branches, it's not going to be a looker. It's not going to have its natural form. There's going to be a lot of potential defects with this tree. So think about, is it a desirable species? We have emerald ash borer that is prevalent now through much of the Front Range. If it's an ash tree and it's not an ash tree you're willing to invest in and treat for, maybe that's your choice right there. Also think about the age and how much is dead. So if it's more than 50% dead, which is this tree, this is probably more like 60, 70% dead, it can be justified that it can be removed. But also, does it have historic or sentimental value? Does it lean? If you have a leaner from a wind or a snow event or some sort of situation, this basically means that there's some sort of structural issue with the tree. If you have a family of raccoons that are living in the tree trunk, it indicates that there's something hollow in there, which could lead to failure. Large dead branches, epicormic shoots. This is where you can have a certified arborist visit your property and do a soundness or a structural integrity evaluation of the tree to make sure that it is a tree that is worth your time to invest in and to keep. Trying to correct for a lean like that is not going to be largely successful. Trying to bring back a tree that is more than 50% dead is not going to be largely successful. So this is where you can have a professional come and maybe tell you the hard truth so that you can make choices. And it doesn't mean you can't replant, right? You can remove this and replant. That's an excellent idea. And then perhaps you could plant a tree that's a little bit more water saving. The other thing to think about is there previous construction that has happened. Is it planted under a power line? And then you get really interesting pruning that has happened. Is it blocking visibility when the tree matures? When the tree matures, is it going to fit in your space? If you have a very small landscape and you have planted what will soon be a full-sized blue spruce, it's going to take over the entire landscape. So you have to also think about the species, the size of the space, and is it going to fit in, or are you going to have to do radical pruning in order to make it fit? Those are all situations that you can consider. And really what you need to ask yourself, is it worth my time? Do I want to continue to invest in this tree? Is this something that means a lot to me? And I will do whatever I can to invest and make sure that it stays healthy, including maybe doing iron chelate treatments for an autumn blaze maple that turns yellow every spring. Or the one on the bottom left is a very old elm tree down in Colorado Springs that is a signature tree of the city. Those are the trees that you invest in. But you have to ask yourself, I can't make that decision for you. And arborists certainly can't make that decision for you, but they can at least offer some possibilities or suggestions as to how you can navigate those things. But it is important to really consider not every tree is worth treating. We also want to protect the tree's root zone. So when we're doing construction, we want to make sure that we're remembering where those tree roots are located. So I mentioned that a lot of the tree roots are going to be located right where those turf roots are. So when we're removing the turf or doing a renovation, we could be intercepting and affecting some of the tree roots in that area. This is a photo at the Larimer County Courthouse. And they took this area out of turf, but you can see how we had mature trees. There's a couple honey locusts and I think an ash in this space. And you can see how when they were removing it, they cut through some of the roots. We want to do as much minimal damage to the tree as possible. We don't want to do any more damage because it causes a lot of stress. So a lot of those tree roots are going to be where you're working and maybe where you're removing sections of the turf area or doing renovation. So just keep that in mind. Also remember that a lot of tree roots are going to extend 3 to 5 times the width of the canopy. So if the width of your canopy is 20 feet, tip to tip, diameter across 20 feet, know that you're going to have roots potentially out to 80 feet. Did I do my math right? I don't think I did. Just know that it's 3 to 5 times the width of the canopy, and those tree roots can extend into the landscape. So again, you're not just growing trees in your yard. If you have a backyard and you share a property line with a neighbor, you're going to have tree roots of theirs and they're going to have tree roots of yours. So that can affect the overall health too. Use mulch as you're able. So if this is all you can do this year, let's say you remove the turf with the intent to plan and plant in future years, you could then take this landscape and just mulch over the top of it. Don't leave bare soil because you're going to have to deal with weeds and other plant pressures. Then you don't want to leave those roots exposed, but you can also always use mulch. So if you hit a snag with your budget, or maybe you just decide that you don't have the resources to water a newly planted landscape this year, that's fine. That's where mulch comes in really, really handy to at least keep the soil in place and also retain some of the soil moisture and protect against weed pressure. Oops, sorry. I got distracted by the comment that someone said, I have a 70-year-old American elm that's 35 feet tall. Might be taller than that, so you have roots. You might have roots to the next town. I'm just letting you know. That's cool. All right, so let's move into how to irrigate our landscape trees. And for those of you, again, who really love hard, fast numbers, it's good if you want to plant newly planted trees. I have hard, fast numbers for you on that. I do not have it for our mature trees. But let's start with newly planted. The way you water, so remember I said do not put mulch over the top of the root ball, because when we water, we want to make sure that we're watering the roots of your newly planted tree. So following planting, you will focus on watering daily 1 to 2 weeks after planting. So every day you are going to water 1 to 2 weeks. And now you're like, well, how much do I water? That's the next slide. Just have a little bit of patience. So water daily for 1 to 2 weeks. Then after 2 weeks have gone by, every 2 to 3 days, you'll water for maybe the next 2 to 3 months. Okay, so every other day for the next 2 to 3 months. After that period of time, after 12 weeks, after 3 months, you can water weekly until the tree is established. And I have a chart For those of you who love to follow directions, I have a chart. And then during this process, during this entire process, you are focusing your efforts on just watering the root ball. And that's where you see the top of it because you haven't mulched it, you haven't put compost on top, you haven't put backfill on top. You're just focusing on watering the top of the root ball. How much water is going to depend on the size of the tree that you plant. The smaller the tree is, the less water it will need because it's a smaller tree and it has a smaller root ball. The bigger the tree, the more water you're going to need. And the bigger the tree, the longer you're going to have to water to get that tree established. Okay, so here is your chart for those of you who love numbers. A 1-inch caliper tree, this is a little guy, just an inch big at the trunk, will take about 1.5 years to get established and will need 1 to 1.5 gallons of water at each watering. So going back to the recommendations, water daily 1 to 2 weeks after planting. So every day you'll add about 1 gallon of water. So a milk jug of water to the root ball of the tree. Then for the next 3 to 12 weeks after planting, every other day, water 1 gallon every other day, okay, for about 3 months. And then after 3 months, you're going to water weekly with 1 gallon of water until the roots are established. This was research done at the University of Minnesota. It has been replicated in a few other places, which is great, but this is a really good recommendation. So going back to my statement that smaller trees need less water, that's where this comes in. So if you decide to plant a 6-inch caliper tree, you know, that's a tree about that big, not only will it take 9 years to establish, and what that means is during those 9 years, it's not going to grow a lot. It's really focusing its efforts on reestablishing its root system. So you're not going to get a lot of top growth, but you're going to get a lot more root growth. It's going to look like it's the same size 9 years later from the day you planted it. Look the exact same, but also look at the difference in the watering that you have to do. So instead of a 1 gallon milk jug, you are filling 1.5 buckets, 5-gallon buckets of water in order to water that root ball because it's so much bigger. So my recommendation to you is if you can buy smaller trees, don't hesitate. They're less expensive. They establish more quickly. It's a smaller hole to dig and they need less water to get established. And they establish so much more quickly, which is so good. That is the whole point of all of this. And this is supplemental water you have to provide to your newly planted trees. If you plant a tree in the middle of your lawn and then run your sprinkler system as you normally would, it's not going to provide enough water to your newly planted tree to get the tree established and to eliminate stress. So if you are watering your lawn in a sustainable, efficient way where maybe you're doing 2 days a week, that's not going to be enough water. Plus, also remember to what I said at the very beginning, the plant that was established first and is more mature is going to have the advantage. So your lawn, which is established, is going to have advantage and it's going to outcompete your small little tree with its small little root system for any water that's applied. So that's why you need to specifically water your newly planted tree yourself and not rely on a sprinkler system. You can use drip. So before you ask, you can use drip, but you do need to monitor the drip irrigation. It's very easy to just put out some drip lines and then attach it to your sprinkler system and set it to run 3 days a week. It might be enough, it might not be enough, but it can lead to some drought stress occasionally if, again, it's not enough water that you're applying or you're not running it frequently enough. So do make sure that you are monitoring the drip irrigation. Plus lines, they get clogged, they get chewed by rabbits, they might get disturbed by dogs. There's a lot of things that can affect the drip irrigation. So it's helpful and you can use it, just make sure that it is being monitored. And the reality of this is that if you plant a newly planted tree without proper water following planting, the tree is likely to die. So no tree in Colorado can be planted and left to the elements to survive and thrive. That is just, it's not the situation that we are living in. So any newly planted tree needs to be properly watered to get it established. And then after that, if it is a drought tolerant tree or a water-wise tree, you can start to reduce the water needs, but make sure that you get it established. And that could be anywhere from 1.5 years up to many years, depending on the size. What about the self-watering bags? They seem like a great idea. Oh, cool, we have this bag, we'll fill it with water. It will leak water slowly down into the root system. I feel that it is the lazy way to do things. And I think they can help. Like, let's say that you plant a new tree and then, you water it for a couple weeks, but then you're going out of town for a long weekend. The newly planted tree could do fine over a weekend with the self-watering bag. The problem is that the bags always look full, especially the green bags that are kind of wrapped around the trunk. They always look full. Something like this might be better. But then I question, and I've never had this actually demonstrated, but I question, for you to pop off that little tab and then sit there and fill it with water, is that faster than just taking the hose that you already have at the tree and adding a gallon or two of water to the root ball? Is that faster? Is it faster to fill that up? I don't know. And it doesn't need to be a slow leaking process to the root ball. It's like when you water your house plants. You water them, and then you walk away, or you put them in the sink and you water them. It can be water applied all at one time. And because you are doing this on a very regular basis, at least for the first few months, like every day or every other day, there's going to be enough moisture to keep those roots hydrated. So I just don't think they're very much a time saver. Again, maybe in a pinch for a long weekend, but I think you going out and focusing your efforts on watering this newly planted tree is going to be far more efficient and also more effective. Now, you could take a 5-gallon bucket, you could drill holes in the bottom, you can mark on the side of the bucket 1 gallon, 2 gallon, 3 gallon. And if you want to then fill it up with the hose and then let that seep into the area around the tree, totally fine. That's fine. But the bucket is not going to be a permanent feature, unlike these gator bags or these watering bags that tend to be left around the trunk for a while. Here's a classic fail of the watering bags on there. These trees were planted again in a health strip between the sidewalk and the street. Something went amiss with this study. I don't know. These were planted in July one summer. We can all assume that July is very hot, which it was. The irrigation wasn't ready to go, but the trees were specced, the trees were planted, and they had no irrigation to support the trees after planting. So they put the gator bags out. They were filled once, and the tree planters, they walked away. They walked away from the site. So this was a hackberry. All of the trees looked terrible, and all of the trees died. All of the trees. There was like 20 or 30 trees in this section, and every single one of them died. So there was obviously a communication gap in there. They always look full, but often really these self-watering bags do not provide enough water to support the tree health and reduce stress. So I wouldn't rely on them. If you're going to plant a tree, take the time, take the investment, and make sure that you're providing the water. So what about deep root watering? I saw that this is in the chat. You just got ahead of me. So again, deep root water, this is a lot of work. And why do you want to work this hard? So the deep root water, you stick into the ground. It provides water to all those deep roots. Well, remember that a lot of our tree roots are going to be in the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil. So when you water, it's not going to do a lot. Plus you have to move this tool around. You have to keep moving it around. And I'm just thinking, isn't it easier to put out a hose and sprinkler and water the entire area as opposed to deep root watering different pockets around the tree? So the photo on the left with the person air spading, that's just to show you how those tree roots radiate out. So the deep root water, again, you'd have to move it every 12 to 24 inches in a circle around the tree. Honestly, hose and sprinkler is going to do a much better job, I think, than the deep root water. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions. I have lost track, Allie, so if you want to point me into a direction, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so let's see. We had a lot of them are about some mature trees as well, some earlier ones. And so I know that that's the section coming up. So we'll address that there. Kind of looking back, we did have some questions about grass removal process for under trees. And so specifically, should you not use a turf removal or a sod cutter rather? I know you addressed this a little bit. So are there other ways people are asking about, are herbicides safe? You mentioned that you use that for some of your grass, but a couple more questions about that.
Okay, so yes, herbicides can be safe if it's the correct herbicide. So you do need to be careful. And I feel like this is a question that maybe takes a little more thought and maybe not one that we need to discuss in depth. But yes, the herbicides can be safe and can be used. Reading the label is key. Read the label to know how the product works and if it's safe to use around trees. Generally, the label will state do not use within the root zone of desired trees and shrubs. That's not a product that you should use. You could also, yes, you could use a sod cutter. Just know when you do that, you might nick some of the tree roots in the area, which can cause damage and stress to the tree. That's okay. But just know that can happen. Or you could try to dig it out and carefully hand dig those grasses. It's not it's not a one size fits all solution. It really just depends on how much time you have and then your ability to want to use chemistry. I think it's kind of a cop out answer. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, no, that's helpful. And I'm just seeing too, there were a couple more that specifically asked about cardboard or sheet mulching and whether that could be harmful for the tree roots. So yeah, specifically that as well.
Yeah, so that can be. So cardboard and sheet mulching, the cardboard isn't really porous enough, and so you're going to have some suffocation or maybe some adverse effects to the tree by using that methodology. I know it's a short-term thing that maybe you do just during the heat of the summer, but again, you have to think about what is my priority? Is the priority the tree health? And if that's the case, you would want to not do you don't want to do anything that could adversely affect the tree, even short term.
Great. And then so we did also have some questions about coming from different angles using squeegee or pea gravel as
Mhm.
mulch around trees. So is that an option? Some folks wondering about the Firewise element of that and if that's better. So yeah, that's the next question.
So yes, you can use squeegee. Just remember, it's an inorganic substance. It's not going to benefit the soils. It does work. It compacts down, but it does allow for good porosity. You'll need to use a thick enough layer. So we're still talking anywhere from 3 to 4 inches of squeegee. So thin is going to not prevent the weeds, and it's not going to retain the soil moisture that you're looking for. So in terms of overall health of the tree, again, thinking about the best benefits for the tree, just think about how the tree grows in nature, right? It's going to have that duff layer of organic material, leaves and branches and things that drop. Squeegee is not necessarily a natural growing environment for the trees, but yes, in certain situations, it can be fun.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we can move on in thinking about the time. So we'll pause there.
Okay, cool. We'll have 20 minutes. Ooh, okay, here we go. All right, watering mature trees. I think this is where the majority of the questions are, so hopefully this will answer. Uh, Full disclosure, I have absolutely no idea how much water mature trees need. I have no idea. You could ask all of my colleagues. We don't know. We have numbers out there and numbers are provided. They're largely made up, if I can be completely honest. What I can tell you is that during the growing season, try to provide 1 to 2 inches of water to your trees. And if you prefer more of the gallons aspect, because you have some sort of meter that is monitoring how many gallons you're putting down, for every inch of caliper or diameter of trunk, the diameter at breast height, about 10 to 15 gallons. That is the best I can give you. And I know it's not great, and I know you're not happy with me, and that's okay, but it's the best I can do. Now, DBH, that's a term that was on the previous slide. So DBH is the diameter at breast height, or basically at chest height. It's measured 4.5 feet up from the soil surface. Okay, so that is what the diameter at breast height is. Caliper is a nursery term. The caliper of a tree, your newly planted tree, has a caliper. Diameter at breast height is what a mature tree is measured at. So we don't call it caliper, and we measure it higher up. So just know that's the differences in those two. Now, how you can calculate DBH, and this is where math comes in. So hopefully you are ready to go with these math. What you're going to do is you're going to measure the circumference of the trunk 4.5 feet up from the level of the soil surface, and then you're going to divide by pi. Okay, so that 3.14, that is the magic number. The circumference is the measurement around the outside of the tree. And in this case, I made up this number that the circumference of this tree is 94.2 inches. We are then going to divide that number by pi, 3.14, which is a constant standard number. And now we know that our diameter is 30 inches at 4.5 feet off the ground. Okay, so what that means is the diameter going across the tree end to end is going to be 30 inches. That is important if you do want to try to water based on the size of your tree. So if you have a 30-inch diameter tree, or a friend with the American elm that is 70 years old, it's probably at least that big. If you're going to try to water 10 to 15 gallons per inch of diameter at breast height, you are then going to apply 300 gallons of water at every irrigation cycle, or up to 450 gallons at every irrigation cycle. And that's if you are able to measure the gallons coming out of your hose. This is maybe not an easy thing to do. It's certainly not achievable if you are watering with a sprinkler, a hose and sprinkler, or even from your irrigation system. But there are flow meters you can put on the end of a hose to actually measure how much water you're putting out. So that is what that looks like. Or you can go back to that 1 to 2 inches of water every couple of weeks during the growing season, and that's much easier to measure because you could put out catch cans or cups to collect the water that you're applying. Okay. Where you want to focus water, and this, we mentioned where the drip line is with mulch and other things. So this is where also you want to water your mature trees. All of the water absorbing roots, or the majority of the water absorbing roots, are located at the drip line. So where that canopy extends and goes straight down to the ground, that is the drip line. And we want to water within the drip line, so just inside and outside of the drip line, to really target where those fine absorbing roots are located that are absorbing the water. Okay, and most of those roots, the majority of those roots, are going to be within the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil, but they can be as deep as 24 inches. Okay. So when we're looking to water, and right now there's been a number of questions, should I water right now? Yes, you should be watering right now. Where should you water? You should water at the tree's drip line using a hose and sprinkler. You could put out soaker hoses, that's totally fine. You could put out a hose and sprinkler. Just don't turn on your irrigation systems because it is going to get cold again. I promise you, it's going to get cold again. But that's where you're going to focus your watering efforts, is at the drip line, not only during the growing season, but also during the winter months as well. What can you use to water? There's a number of things. So you can use lawn irrigation. I thought I had specifics. So you can use lawn irrigation when your sprinkler system is turned on. You can use soaker hoses and get a big piece of soaker hose, attach it to your hose from your spigot, and then you can wrap those inside and outside of the drip line. You can use an above ground sprinkler, that's what's shown here. And then you can also use drip irrigation, which we are going to go into in more detail, especially if you are going to change any watering to your turf system and you decide to put in drip specifically to your trees. There are ways that you can calculate how to do that effectively to make sure that your tree is getting enough water. Now, our publication, from CSU, and it's Watering Mature Shade Trees. If you want to type that into a search tool, Watering Mature Shade Trees from CSU Extension. We recommend the 10 to 15 gallons of water. Again, I just told you it's a made up number. But again, that big yellow text box, some water is better than no water. That is what you need to remember. Doing something and providing some irrigation to your trees during the growing season and also during the fall and winter when we don't have persistent snow cover or rain, some water is better than no water. That is what you need to focus on. If it's easier to use a tool and grab a slender screwdriver and then poke it into the ground, as long as it can penetrate easily to a depth of 6 to 8 inches, you have enough soil moisture. If it's hard or you can only get it down about an inch, that is when you need to water. Okay, so go out and do that. If you haven't been watering this year and you have been in an area that hasn't received a lot of snow or rainfall or anything like much of the Front Range, starting now is going to be a good thing. I would have loved had you started 3 months ago, but starting now is also going to benefit your trees because they're going to start pushing growth soon. And growth is based on how much water is available to those trees. And if the soil around those trees is dry, it's going to be a really tough thing for our trees. So again, some water is better than no water. You can measure the amount of water. You can collect the amount of water. Just do the best we can. It's a science, but it's not a actual hard science where we have numbers to give you. And then always remember during the growing season, the water that you apply to the turf and the trees is split about 50-50. So maybe you water a little bit more to target the tree growth. And again, you can target in the areas of the drip line as well. So if you decide to take out your lawn and convert it to something else, you can then create or establish drip irrigation for your trees. So this is a wonderful landscape, a great conversion. So we have our existing tree. We had a very, square lawn, and this is what this conversion did. So they put in a retaining wall, they put in mulch, and then they actually had dedicated drip irrigation, not only to the plants, but also to the tree. So let's talk about how you can do that. This is an amazing publication, and I want to tell you right now, don't be scared. It's quite involved, but you can scan the QR code, or you can also do a search for the University of Reno drip irrigation for trees. So our folks down in Nevada have created this publication that I think is really excellent, that tells you specifically how to set up drip irrigation to water your mature trees in the landscape should you do a conversion, take out turf, and those things. So this is a really amazing publication. I will tell you that it's pretty math focused. And so if you're not a fan of math, find a friend who is a fan of math that you can work through these things together. But I'll just take you through a lot of the basics. Drip irrigation is super efficient. In terms of efficiency, we're talking 95% efficient. What water comes out of the drip irrigation is actually applied to the ground and then used by the plants. Compared to like overhead irrigation or sprinklers or anything like that, those might be maybe 70% efficient, but we're still losing a lot to the atmosphere. There's a couple different things that you can look at for drip irrigation. There's inline emitters where they have the actual emitter within the tubing itself, or you can do spaghetti tubing that comes off of a main line. So you have to decide what works best for you. When we're placing drip irrigation around trees, this is from that publication, you'll want to put it in the critical root zone. So that is focusing at the drip line, just inside and outside of the drip line. So you're going to have a ring that goes a little bit closer in the center within the canopy, and then you're going to have a ring that goes just outside the drip line. What we want to do is when we're applying drip irrigation, we want to make sure we're covering up to 75% of that critical root zone area. That again is where those fine roots are located that are absorbing the water and nutrients. So that's where we're focusing our drip irrigation. And yes, as your trees get bigger, as they get more mature, you are going to have to either add more drip lines and more emitters, You're also going to have to add or create things that are going to be further away. So when your tree is little, the roots are in one location. As the tree grows, you're going to need to expand those drip lines. So that is something to consider going forward. So the tubing specifics, you can get them on different spacing. Probably for Colorado, the 18-inch spacing is going to be good. And that's just because we tend to have more clay soils. If you're in a pocket of Colorado that has more sandy soils, you could go on the 12-inch spacing. But 18-inch, you're going to save a little bit of money because you don't have to buy as many emitters. And it's all based on capillarity. So capillarity is just how water moves through the soil. That's the biggest thing. So to figure out how much water you have to put down, this is where the math comes in. So in the last 9 minutes here, we're going to go through some math. You need to understand what your ET, how much water is being lost from the landscape. And the EPA has this WaterSense water budget data finder. You just type in your zip code and it tells you your hottest month, which is usually July, especially in the Front Range, and then how much water you need to reapply to your landscape that's lost to atmosphere and solar radiation and all of those things. Okay, so what we want to do in a perfect world, replace the amount of water that is lost from the plants via drip irrigation. Okay, so here's the math for you. Based on Fort Collins, if you're up in this area, the peak month is going to be July. Your ET is 8.29 inches of water during the month of July. So during July, you lose a little bit over 8 inches of water. So that's what we want to replace to make sure that our trees are not operating in a deficit. But we get hopefully 1.5 inches of rain during the month of July. So if you take the 8.29, subtract 1.55, we have to apply using irrigation 6.74 inches of water back into our plant system, specifically our trees, so that they're not operating in a deficit. So if you take that number, 6.74, and divide it by 4.3, which is the average number of weeks per month, okay, that's a constant, you need to apply about 1.5 inches of water every week during the month of July, okay? But you can do this based on your own zip code. Your irrigation frequency will depend on what you're watering. So focusing on mature trees there, we want to water to a depth of maybe 18 inches, and we're going to water 1 to 2 weeks during the growing season. So let's aim for, if it's really hot, maybe once a week, or you could go twice a month. That would be fine. And then this is where more math comes in, how much to irrigate. So you know how much you need to replenish, but then you have to take into account how big your tree is. And you have to do some measurements not only on the tree, but on some other things as well. So the publication from the University of Reno is divided into 2 types of plants. So there's the high water use trees and there's the lower water use trees. Now, lower water use trees might be your hackberry and some of the oaks. Higher water use is going to be linden, blue spruce, and some of those trees that just need a little bit more water. It's a little arbitrary. If you feel more comfortable calculating everything at the higher water use rate, by all means, go ahead and do that. If you have an idea that you have a lower water use tree, you can focus on that. So there is an equation in the publication where you take the ET, and then there's a water use factor that is provided. Then you need to calculate the root zone in square feet and then multiply by a constant. So you take the crown diameter, you multiply by another constant, and this is where the math, it's a lot right now, and it's too much and it's too overwhelming. The publication takes you through all of these things. It tells you how to calculate the root zone of your tree. It tells you how to calculate the crown diameter of your tree, and then you just plug and play. So formulas, which are lovely, you just have to enter those numbers in order to know how much water to apply. So I did the math for you. I picked a low water use tree. Let's say we're trying to water a hackberry. You would have the emitter flow rate. You would know how many gallons per hour your emitters, the drip emitters that you purchased, what the emitter flow rate is. You would multiply that by the number of emitters, which is dependent on the size of your tree, and the number of hours that you need. That gives you the total gallons of water for the tree that you need to do. But the mystery here is, how long do I water? So you're going to do all of those numbers and then eventually divide your total gallons to get the total runtime. So again, this is where you can take some time following this presentation, just because we're running short of time, how to do this. And you can look at these, but all of the math is spelled out in these slides. Your eyes are glazing over at this point. You just want to go and watch the pit because you're just done with this. But it's really not as scary as it looks. And the publication really does lead you through step by step, which is great. So if you are a geek and you really want to water your trees and provide the same amount of water that they need based on the size, this is what you can do. And it's a really excellent publication. And again, a lot of it is just plug and play. You have the formulas, you have the constants, and you just have to do it based on the size of your tree. Okay, so there's that publication. Please don't be scared of it. It's really a wonderful publication. And the short version is what's online. Down at the bottom, if you say download full publication, it's like 47 pages. The first 20 are about why trees are important and how trees use water. The rest of it is all of the math and things like that. So it can be really helpful. With final messages, the fall and winter watering, this is where we need to focus our efforts. So please don't get too excited about doing cleanup and cutting back stuff. You can be pruning, that's totally fine. But if there's one thing that you can focus on right now, it's this fall and winter watering. It is so important. We just haven't had enough precipitation. Water when it's above 40 degrees, so pick a day, any day in the future, as early in the day as possible, because we want that water to be absorbed into the ground before it freezes at night, which is still very, very common. Use your hose and sprinkler. Do not turn on your irrigation system yet. It's just, you'll have to blow it out again. So just use a hose and sprinkler. Hose and sprinkler can be a really good friend to you, and it's a really efficient way to water. If you are in a place that has gotten some snow, last Friday we got some rain, some snow. It was about a ½ inch total. Just know that the snow levels and the moisture in the snow can vary. So we sometimes have really dry snows, which maybe it takes 20 inches of snow to get us 1 inch of water. Those heavy, wet spring snows that we might get that are, branch breaking snows, they might be an 8-to-1 ratio where it's 8 inches of snow for 1 inch of water. And just to tell you, there are lower water use trees that you can consider, especially if you're looking to plant. If your town has an Arbor Day sale, you can look for these tree species or go to your local nursery or garden center. The one featured here is Sensation Box Elder. It's kind of a medium tree. I wouldn't say it's a shade tree. Also, don't judge it because it's a box elder. It's a male clone, so it doesn't have fruits. It's not going to attract box elder bugs. And there are a lot of other species. Give a nod to the oaks. A lot of our oaks, especially the white oak trees, have lower water use requirements, and they do very well. I think we could plant a lot more oaks in our landscapes and be very successful. For smaller trees, this is the Russian hawthorn. It's a great tree. The fruit is persistent during the winter months. There's a lot of natives that you can also consider, especially for our smaller trees like the Gamble oak, the big tooth maples. There's lots of junipers. I used to just automatically say don't plant junipers. Junipers are great, especially if you're in a space that can accommodate them. Not good for fire-prone areas, but they can be really, really drought-tolerant, very attractive trees and shrubs for the landscape. And then there's lots of other trees too. There's a couple of serviceberries. There's a Utah serviceberry, which is a native. And there's a lot of other smaller ornamentals that can tolerate lower water use. So look to those. And again, you'll have this list and these resources tomorrow. So with that, I can take, I don't know, maybe one question. Otherwise, my email address is there. Please email me with any questions I didn't get to.
Thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, thank you, Allison. Have a lot of comments that are thanking as well that there was a lot of great information in a delightful way, which completely agree. So thanks everyone so much for your time, and hope you have a great rest of your evening, potentially watching the pit, like Allison said.
Bye, everybody.
Wonderful. Yeah. Have a great one.